February 12, 1942, the English Channel, Dover Strait. German naval commanders stood on the bridges of their warships, watching fog roll across black waters like a blessing from the gods themselves. Then, at 10:47 a.m., the first British radar stations flickered to life, and what began as Germany's most audacious escape became their descent into a meticulously prepared killing field. The morning had begun with confidence. In the French port of Brest, 3 of Germany's most powerful warships prepared for Operation Cerberus, the Channel dash that would take them home through waters Britain had controlled for centuries. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, along with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, represented the pride of the Kriegsmarine. Their steel hulls gleamed even in the pre-dawn darkness, each vessel a floating fortress of German engineering.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Admiral Audacious paced the deck of Scharnhorst, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Around him, sailors moved with practiced precision, their boots echoing against metal as they prepared for departure. The plan was simple in concept, mad in execution. Sail through the narrowest point of the English Channel in broad daylight, past Dover's guns, through waters so heavily mined that even German charts marked them in red. But Celiax had advantages. Weather forecasts promised fog and low clouds. Intelligence suggested British vigilance had grown complacent. And most crucially, the Luftwaffe had promised an umbrella of fighters so thick that no British aircraft could penetrate. The admiral checked his watch. In 30 minutes, they would cast off. In 12 hours, they would either be home or at the bottom of the channel. The contrast between German confidence and British preparation was already taking shape, though neither side fully understood it yet. While Celiax studied weather charts in Brest, hundreds of miles away in Dover, British coastal batteries had been reinforced with new gun positions. In scattered airfields across southern England, torpedo bomber crews slept in their flight suits, waiting for the call that their commanders swore would come. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay stood in the Dover Castle war room, a converted medieval chamber now filled with maps, telephones, and the quiet tension of men who knew something was coming, but not when. He ran his finger along the channel on the map before him, tracing the route any German ship would have to take. The narrowest point, barely 20 miles of open water, had been transformed over months into what he privately called the gauntlet. He said to his intelligence officer, "They'll come. The question is whether they're mad enough to come in daylight or foolish enough to try it at night." The British preparations had been systematic, almost mechanical in their thoroughness. Every mile of the channel approach had been studied, measured, and weaponized. Coastal batteries positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Submarine patrol zones established in mathematical precision. Motor torpedo boat squadrons stationed at intervals that would allow rapid response. And above it all, the radar stations, their invisible fingers reaching out across the water, waiting to touch metal.
But preparation alone doesn't guarantee success. The British had one critical vulnerability: coordination. Their forces were scattered across multiple commands, different branches of service, each with its own communication systems and chains of authority. The Royal Navy controlled the destroyers. The RAF commanded the bombers. Coastal Command operated the reconnaissance aircraft. In theory, they would work together. In practice, they had never been tested. At 10:47 a.m., the test began. The radar operator at Swingate Station blinked at his screen, certain his eyes were deceiving him. The blips were too large, too many, moving too fast to be a fishing fleet. He reached for the telephone, his hand steady despite the hammering of his heart. Within minutes, the report climbed the chain of command. Large vessels, multiple contacts, heading northeast through the Strait of Dover. But the fog that had blessed the German departure now cursed British response. Visual confirmation was impossible. The radar blips could be anything: a convoy, a probe, or the main German fleet.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Protocol demanded verification before committing forces. Minutes became hours as reconnaissance aircraft were scrambled, only to find the channel wrapped in gray mist that swallowed everything beyond a few hundred yards. Aboard Scharnhorst, Celiax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had made it past Scharnhorst undetected. The fog held. The Luftwaffe fighters circled overhead, in relays, their engines a constant reassuring drone. His ships moved in tight formation, their bows cutting through calm water at 27 knots. Every mile brought them closer to safety, further from the British bases in Portsmouth and Plymouth. The German formation was a masterpiece of naval coordination. Scharnhorst led, her massive 11-inch guns trained outward, ready to engage any threat. Gneisenau followed close behind, her own batteries adding to the defensive firepower. Prinz Eugen brought up the rear, her anti-aircraft guns already tracking the sky. Around them sailed a screen of destroyers and torpedo boats, 40 vessels in total, moving through British waters like a steel arrow aimed at the heart of enemy pride. What Celiax didn't know was that the British net was already closing in, not with the speed of lightning, but with the methodical patience of a spider sensing vibration on its web. In the Dover Castle war room, Ramsay made his decision. Even without visual confirmation, the radar plots were too significant to ignore. He reached for the red telephone, the direct line to the Admiralty. "Operation Fuller," he said simply. "Execute." The words unleashed chaos disguised as coordination. At Manston Airfield, Swordfish torpedo bombers roared to life, their fabric-covered wings shuddering in the wind. At Dover Harbor, motor torpedo boats cast off their moorings, engines screaming as they raced toward the reported contacts. Destroyer squadrons in the Thames estuary received flash orders to proceed at maximum speed toward the channel.
But the British response suffered from the fragmentation of command. The RAF bombers at Manston didn't know the destroyers were coming. The coastal batteries at Dover hadn't been informed of the MTB attack. Each force moved independently, unaware of the others, converging on the German fleet like separate fingers of a hand that had never learned to close into a fist. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond led the first wave, 6 Swordfish biplanes that looked more like relics from the previous war than modern weapons. His pilots were young, some barely 20, sitting in open cockpits where the wind cut like knives even through their flight suits. Each aircraft carried a single torpedo, 1,800 pounds of explosives that had to be dropped at exactly the right distance, the right angle, the right speed. As they approached the channel, Esmond saw the fog beginning to break. Patches of clear sky appeared like windows in a gray curtain. Through one such window, he caught his first glimpse of the German fleet. His breath caught. He had expected perhaps 1 capital ship, maybe 2. Instead, he counted 3 massive silhouettes surrounded by what seemed like dozens of smaller vessels. The entire Kriegsmarine surface fleet appeared to be making its run. He keyed his radio. "All aircraft, this is leader. Target sighted. Multiple capital ships. Prepare for attack run." What happened next would be debated in naval colleges for decades. Esmond lent his obsolete biplanes directly into the teeth of the most concentrated anti-aircraft fire the war had yet seen. The Luftwaffe fighters pounced first, Messerschmitt 109s diving from the clouds like hawks on sparrows. The first Swordfish exploded in mid-air, its torpedo falling harmlessly into the sea. The second banked hard, trying to evade, only to fly directly into a wall of flak from the destroyer screen. Esmond pressed on. His plane shook as cannon shells tore through the fabric wings. He could see the Prinz Eugen now, its massive hull filling his vision. He lined up his approach, dropped to 50 feet above the waves, released his torpedo. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly lighter. He didn't see the impact. His plane was already spinning, one wing gone, the sea rushing up to meet him. All 6 swordfish were destroyed in less than 4 minutes. Not a single torpedo found its mark. The British had drawn first blood, but it was their own. Aboard Scharnhorst, German gunners cheered as the last British biplane splashed into the channel, but Celiax felt no joy. The attack, however futile, meant the British knew. Secrecy was lost. From now until they reached German waters, they would be under constant assault. He ordered speed increased to 30 knots. The race was on. The British response intensified with every passing hour, but it remained fragmented, uncoordinated, almost desperate. Motor torpedo boats attacked from the south, their small hulls bouncing across waves as they tried to close within torpedo range. German destroyers intercepted them, driving them back with accurate gunnery. RAF bombers appeared in scattered formations, each group attacking independently, without fighter escort, without coordination with the naval forces.
The channel that morning became a testament to the difference between preparation and execution. Britain had prepared the trap, the mines, the guns, the aircraft, the ships, but execution required something more: unity of command, clarity of communication, the ability to mass forces at the decisive point. These the British lacked, and the Germans exploited every gap. By noon, the German fleet had passed Dover. The massive coastal guns there, capable of hurtling shells 20 miles, fired salvo after salvo into the fog. Observers reported hits, but when the mist cleared, the German ships sailed on, their formations intact. Either the hits were imagined, or the German armor was thicker than intelligence had suggested. In the Dover war room, Ramsay watched the plot table with growing frustration. His forces were engaged, but engaged piecemeal, each attack absorbed by the German formation like waves against a breakwater. He needed to concentrate his strength, to hit the Germans with everything at once. But the communication systems couldn't handle it. Orders took 30 minutes to reach ships that were 20 miles away. By the time forces assembled, the Germans had moved. The afternoon brought a change in weather and a change in fortune, but not the way the British had hoped. The fog lifted completely, giving clear visibility. German lookouts could now see threats approaching from miles away. The Luftwaffe fighter umbrella, already formidable, intensified. Spitfires sent to escort British bombers found themselves outnumbered 3-1. Dogfights erupted across the Channel sky, contrails marking the passage of aircraft locked in combat, while below, the German fleet steamed steadily northeast. What the British didn't realize, what they couldn't realize without unified intelligence, was that their attacks, though individually unsuccessful, were having a cumulative effect. The German formation, forced to maneuver constantly, was consuming fuel at an unsustainable rate. Destroyers that had left Brest with full bunkers now showed gauges dropping toward half. More critically, the constant high-speed maneuvering was straining engines never designed for such sustained punishment. Aboard Gneisenau, Chief Engineer Klaus Hoffmann watched his pressure gauges with mounting concern. Boiler number 3 was showing irregularities. The constant demand for maximum power was creating stress fractures in pipes that should have been replaced months ago. He reported to the captain, who reported to Celiax. The admiral's response was simple: maintain speed, we're nearly through. But they weren't nearly through. They were entering the most dangerous section of the channel. The approaches to the Thames estuary, where British mining had been most intensive. German minesweepers had cleared a path weeks before, but mines drifted, chains broke, and the channel currents were treacherous. Celiax ordered the formation to tighten further, each ship following exactly in the wake of the one before. The first mine struck Scharnhorst at 2:31 p.m. The explosion erupted amidships, a column of water rising higher than the mainmast.
The battlecruiser shuddered, her forward momentum checked as if she had hit a wall. Damage control parties raced below, finding flooding in 3 compartments. The pumps engaged, but Scharnhorst's speed dropped to 20 knots, then 15. Ciliax faced the decision every admiral dreads: continue with the damaged flagship, slowing the entire formation, or transfer his flag and leave Scharnhorst to manage alone. He chose pragmatism. Within 20 minutes, a destroyer came alongside and the admiral transferred, scrambling across heaving decks while shells from distant British batteries threw up spouts of water around them. The British, watching from radar stations and reconnaissance aircraft, saw the German formation falter. This was the moment Ramsay had waited for. He ordered every available asset to concentrate on the damaged battlecruiser. Destroyers from the Thames, bombers from East Anglia, even submarines lurking in the patrol zones, all received the same order: sink Scharnhorst. But the sea itself seemed to conspire against British efforts. A sudden squall swept across the channel, reducing visibility to nothing. When it passed, Scharnhorst had vanished from the plot boards. Frantic radio calls went unanswered. Had she sunk? Had she turned back? The confusion multiplied as reports conflicted. One pilot claimed to have seen her listing heavily. A submarine reported torpedo hits. A coastal battery claimed to have straddled her with shells. The truth was simpler and more frustrating. Scharnhorst, though damaged, had not sunk. Her crew had controlled the flooding, restored partial power, and, using the squall as cover, had rejoined the German formation. By the time British forces converged on her last known position, she was 10 miles away, limping but alive, protected by the massed firepower of her sister ships. As evening approached, both sides took stock. The Germans had lost 2 destroyers to British attacks, suffered damage to Scharnhorst, and expended nearly half their ammunition. But they were past the Dover Strait, past the worst of the British defenses, approaching German-controlled waters. Ciliax, back aboard Scharnhorst, allowed himself cautious optimism. They would make it. The Channel Dash, the mad gamble, would succeed. The British had thrown everything at the Germans: aircraft, ships, coastal guns, submarines. They had launched over 300 sorties, fired thousands of shells, dropped dozens of torpedoes. In return, they had sunk 2 destroyers and damaged 1 battlecruiser. It was, by any measure, a failure. But Ramsay, staring at the plot table as darkness fell, understood something his superiors didn't yet grasp. The battle wasn't over. It had merely entered its second phase, and this phase would be fought not with guns and torpedoes, but with something the British had seeded throughout the Channel months before, something waiting in the darkness with mechanical patience: the mines. The German fleet sailed on into the gathering dusk, their crews exhausted but triumphant. Behind them, the English Channel returned to its cold, indifferent rhythm. But beneath those dark waters, thousands of mines swayed gently on their chains, waiting for steel hulls to pass overhead. The deadliest part of Britain's trap was about to close. The darkness brought no rest. As night wrapped the Channel in black velvet, the German fleet maintained their northeastern course, every man aboard fighting exhaustion that came not from physical labor, but from 12 hours of constant tension. The engines thrummed steadily beneath their feet, a rhythm that had become the heartbeat of survival. They had crossed the Channel in daylight, a feat no German naval commander would have dared imagine 6 months earlier. On Scharnhorst's bridge, now lit only by the dim red glow of instrument panels, Admiral Ciliax studied the charts one more time. The damage his flagship had sustained was manageable but concerning. 3 compartments still partially flooded, speed reduced to 23 knots, and the starboard list giving the massive ship an awkward gait through the water. But they were alive. More importantly, they were almost home. The navigator marked their position with practiced precision. They had passed the Strait of Dover,
survived the gauntlet of British attacks, and now sailed through waters that grew progressively safer with each nautical mile. German air cover from bases in Holland would reach them by dawn. Minesweepers from Wilhelmshaven were already clearing their approach paths. The champagne, Celiax thought grimly, was premature but not unwarranted. What the admiral didn't know, what no one aboard any German vessel knew, was that the British had spent the previous 6 months planting a garden of death specifically for this moment, not in the narrow straits where German intelligence expected them, but here, in the approaches to German waters where confidence would replace caution. Vice Admiral Ramsay's trap had never been about the aerial attacks or the surface engagements. Those were merely the visible fist that drew attention while the invisible hand positioned the knife. The first indication came at 9:47 p.m. Gneisenau's lookout spotted something in the water ahead, a darker patch against the Black Sea that didn't move with the waves. The warning came too late. The battlecruiser's bow struck the mine at 28 knots, and the explosion tore through her forward sections like a hammer through glass. The blast was so powerful, it lifted the bow entirely out of the water, thousands of tons of steel rising as if the sea itself had punched upward. Below decks, men were thrown against bulkheads, lights shattered, steam pipes ruptured, filling compartments with scalding vapor. The forward magazine miraculously did not detonate, but the flooding was catastrophic. Water poured through a hole 15 feet across, racing through passages and compartments faster than the damage control parties could respond. Within 3 minutes, Gneisenau's bow had settled 5 feet lower in the water. Captain Otto Fine ordered emergency stop, but momentum carried the wounded ship forward into waters that suddenly revealed themselves as a minefield of surgical precision. A second mine detonated against her port side, this one striking near the engine room. The explosion killed 12 men instantly and crippled the port turbine. Gneisenau shuddered to a halt, her engine silent, her bow nearly underwater, listing heavily as pumps fought a losing battle against the sea. The disaster multiplied. 2 destroyers, rushing to assist the stricken battlecruiser, sailed directly into the mine pattern. The first, Z-29, simply vanished in a pillar of fire that rose 200 feet into the night sky. The explosion was so violent that debris rained down on ships half a mile away. Sailors on nearby vessels stood frozen, watching pieces of their comrade's ship fall from the sky like burning snow. The second destroyer, Hermann Schoeman, lost her entire bow section. She didn't sink immediately, but began circling helplessly, her rudder jammed, her crew abandoning ship as she spiraled toward her death. Aboard Scharnhorst, Celiax received the reports with a coldness that masked his despair. In less than 5 minutes, he had lost 1 battlecruiser to critical damage, 2 destroyers sunk or sinking, and his entire formation was now paralyzed by the realization that they were sailing through waters seeded with death. The British hadn't needed to sink them in the Dover Strait. They had simply needed to drive them forward into this pre-prepared killing ground. The admiral faced a choice that would define his career and possibly the war. Stop here, attempt to clear the mines, and become a stationary target for British bombers that would arrive with dawn, or push forward, accepting casualties, gambling that speed and luck would carry them through. He checked the charts again. German waters were 40 nautical miles ahead, safety if they could reach it. He made his decision with the certainty of a man who understood that all choices were now terrible ones. All ships maintain course and speed, navigate in single file, follow Scharnhorst's wake exactly. The theory was sound. If Scharnhorst's path was clear, following ships would avoid the mines. But theory assumed precision navigation in darkness, calm seas, and no drift. The channel offered none of these.
The formation tightened into a line that stretched for 2 miles, each ship's captain sweating as they struggled to maintain position in the wake of the vessel ahead, while darkness made judgment nearly impossible. Prinz Eugen came next in line. Her captain, Helmut Brinkmann, stood at the bridge wing, eyes straining to keep Scharnhorst's stern light in view. The heavy cruiser rolled in the swells, and each roll threatened to push her out of the safe channel. Brinkmann ordered minor course corrections every 30 seconds, tiny adjustments that represented the difference between survival and annihilation. His hands gripped the rail so tightly his knuckles showed white even in the darkness. The mine that struck Prinz Eugen detonated beneath her stern at 10:23 p.m. The explosion destroyed her rudder assembly and fractured her propeller shafts. The cruiser, suddenly unable to steer, swung broadside to her course. Her engines, still driving forward, pushed her directly into a drift of 3 additional mines. The detonations came in rapid succession, each blast tearing new wounds in her hull. Within minutes, Prinz Eugen was down by the stern, her propellers visible above the waterline, her decks tilting at an angle that made movement treacherous. Brinkmann gave the order he had prayed would never come. Prepare to abandon ship.
But the sea offered no sanctuary. The water temperature was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. A man could survive perhaps 20 minutes before hypothermia claimed him. Lifeboats launched into darkness had no guarantee of rescue. The remaining German ships dared not stop in the minefield. Some men chose to stay with the ship, preferring a quick death to slow freezing in the channel. Others jumped, their cries swallowed by the wind and the sound of grinding metal as Prinz Eugen settled deeper. The British, monitoring from their coastal stations, could scarcely believe the reports coming in. Their surface attacks had failed. Their airstrikes had been decimated. But the mines, the patient mines laid months ago in patterns calculated by mathematicians and oceanographers, were achieving what courage and firepower could not. The trap was closing, not with a dramatic snap, but with the methodical certainty of mathematics. Scharnhorst sailed on, her wake now marked by burning oil and desperate men. Celiax refused to look back. Every glance toward the dying ships behind him was a knife in his conscience. But stopping meant death for all of them. The destroyer escort had been reduced to fragments. Both accompanying battle cruisers were gone or dying. His flagship remained afloat only through the desperate efforts of damage control parties working in flooded compartments where one wrong step meant drowning in darkness. At midnight, the formation, now barely worthy of the name, encountered the final barrier Ramsay had prepared. Acoustic mines, a new British weapon that detonated not from contact, but from the sound of propellers. These had been laid in the approaches to the swept channels, positioned where German minesweepers couldn't detect them because they left no magnetic signature, no electrical field, only patient microphones listening for the specific frequency of marine engines. The first acoustic mine detonated beneath a destroyer, Z-25, breaking her back. The ship folded in the middle like paper, her bow and stern rising as the center section collapsed. She sank in less than a minute, taking her entire crew with her. The second mine found another destroyer, Paul Jacobi, tearing off her stern and leaving her propellerless and drifting. The captain ordered anchors dropped, a desperate measure to prevent his ship from drifting into more mines while he waited for rescue that might never come. Scharnhorst's chief engineer reported to the bridge with news that made Celiac's blood run cold. The constant high-speed operation, the evasive maneuvering, and now the slow navigation through the minefield had consumed fuel faster than predicted. At current consumption, they would run dry 20 miles short of Wilhelmshaven. The battlecruiser that had survived British attacks and mine strikes would become a floating hulk, helpless and waiting for dawn to bring British bombers to finish what the night had started. The admiral calculated rapidly. Reduce speed to conserve fuel, but that meant longer exposure in the minefield. Maintain speed and risk running dry in hostile waters, or make for the nearest German-controlled port, IJmuiden in Holland, which was closer but offered less protection. Every option led to danger. He chose the least terrible path, make for IJmuiden at reduced speed, and pray the mines had been exhausted. What Ciliax didn't know was that Ramsay's planning had accounted for exactly this decision. The mine density actually increased closer to the Dutch coast, precisely where desperate German commanders would turn when running low on fuel. The British admiral had studied the psychology of naval warfare as carefully as its mechanics. He knew that survival instinct would drive damaged ships toward the nearest port, and he had seeded those approaches most heavily. The explosion that finally crippled Scharnhorst came at 1:47 a.m., striking her port side amidships. This mine was larger than the others, a 2,000-pound charge that had been positioned with specific knowledge of German battlecruiser construction. The blast penetrated her armor belt, something the British surface attacks had failed to achieve, and flooded her port engine room. The massive ship rolled 15 degrees, hung there as if deciding whether to capsize, then slowly righted herself as counterflooding balanced the damage. But the cost of survival was speed. Scharnhorst could manage only 12 knots now, barely faster than a brisk walk. Her list was permanent, her electrical systems failing, and fires burned in 3 compartments that damage control had abandoned. Ciliax stood on the tilting bridge deck and acknowledged the truth. His flagship would not make IJmuiden. She would not make any port. The only question was whether she would sink from mine damage or British attack at dawn. The admiral ordered all non-essential personnel to the lifeboats. Nearly 800 men, many wounded, began the process of abandoning ship in darkness and cold that turned the simple act of climbing into a boat into a test of endurance. Some boats capsized in the launch. Others drifted away before they could be fully loaded. Men fell into the water and disappeared, their cries fading into the mechanical sounds of a dying ship. Ciliax remained aboard with a skeleton crew, determined to keep Scharnhorst afloat until rescue arrived or the sea claimed her. They worked in near-total darkness, the emergency lights having failed, using hand pumps when the electrical pumps died, stuffing mattresses and hammocks into gaps where water poured through. It was futile work, holding back the ocean with fabric and hope, but they did it because the alternative was to simply wait for death.
Dawn arrived not with beauty, but with the gray indifference of a Channel morning. The first light revealed the full extent of the disaster. Scharnhorst wallowed alone, her escorts scattered or sunk, her sister ships gone. Gneisenau had managed to beach herself on a sandbar 20 miles back, her crew evacuating to small boats. Prinz Eugen had capsized an hour before dawn, her hull visible above the water like the back of a beached whale. The channel was littered with debris, oil slicks, and life rafts containing men who had survived the night but faced a morning that offered little hope. British reconnaissance aircraft arrived first, circling the crippled battlecruiser like vultures assessing prey. Ciliax watched them through binoculars, waiting for the bombs he knew must come. But the attack, when it materialized, came not from aircraft but from something unexpected. 3 British destroyers appeared on the horizon, racing toward Scharnhorst at flank speed. They had been hunting German ships all night and now found the greatest prize of all, a crippled battlecruiser unable to maneuver or fight effectively. The German anti-aircraft guns, jury-rigged to fire at surface targets, opened fire at maximum range. Shells splashed around the approaching destroyers, but the British captains were experienced and desperate. They wove between the shell splashes, closing the range until they reached torpedo firing position. 6 torpedoes launched in succession, their wakes visible as white lines across the gray water.
Scharnhorst's captain ordered hard rudder, but the ship responded with agonizing slowness. The first torpedo passed ahead, missing by meters. The second struck her bow, the explosion adding to damage already sustained. The third and fourth both hit amidships, and the battlecruiser shuddered under impacts that would have sunk a lesser vessel. But German engineering, even in death, was formidable. Scharnhorst remained afloat, settling lower, but refusing to sink. The British destroyers circled for another attack, but German aircraft finally arrived from bases in Holland. Messerschmitts dove on the destroyers, forcing them to withdraw. For a brief moment, Celiax allowed himself to believe rescue was possible. Aircraft could provide cover. Tugs could be sent from Imoyden. Scharnhorst might yet survive. The mine that ended her came at 8:34 a.m. The battlecruiser, drifting with the current, had moved into a section of the minefield not yet traversed. The explosion struck her keel, the structural spine of the ship, and broke it. The crack was audible even above the wind, a sound like the earth splitting. Scharnhorst's back broke, her hull fracturing along a line that ran nearly her entire length. The end came with terrible speed. Water flooded through the broken hull faster than any pump could counter. The bow section tilted upward, exposing barnacle-crusted plates that had never been meant to see sunlight. The stern began to settle, dragging the entire ship backward into the sea. Men still aboard ran for the upper decks, but the angle was too steep. Some slid down the tilting deck into the water. Others clung to railings as the ship rotated beneath them.
Celiax jumped from the bridge wing seconds before it submerged. The cold water struck him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. He surfaced, gasping, watching his flagship disappear. Scharnhorst's bow pointed skyward for a long moment, propellers still visible, then slipped beneath the waves with a sound like a great exhalation. The vortex created by her sinking pulled men and debris downward. Some escaped, many didn't. German rescue vessels arrived an hour later, plucking survivors from the water. Of Scharnhorst's crew of nearly 2,000, fewer than 800 survived. Gneisenau's beaching had saved most of her crew, but the ship itself was a total loss. Prinz Eugen's capsizing had been so rapid that casualties exceeded 70%. The destroyer losses were total, entire crews gone without a trace. In the Dover Castle war room, Ramsay received the final tallies with quiet satisfaction. The surface battle had been a British failure, but the strategic result was a German catastrophe. 3 capital ships destroyed or so badly damaged they would never return to service. 6 destroyers sunk. Over 3,000 German sailors dead or captured. And most importantly, the myth of German naval invincibility in European waters was shattered. The post-battle analysis would reveal the true genius of Ramsay's trap. The mines had been laid not randomly, but in patterns designed to account for German navigation, likely routes, and probable decisions under stress. Mathematicians had calculated drift patterns. Oceanographers had studied current flows. Intelligence officers had predicted command choices. The result was a weapon that thought, in a sense, a passive barrier that anticipated and countered its enemy's moves. Churchill, when informed of the results, reportedly said, "They came seeking glory and found geometry." The phrase captured the essence of the engagement. German courage had been undeniable. Their seamanship was excellent. Their ships were magnificently engineered. But against the methodical application of science, planning, and patience, these qualities proved insufficient. The strategic implications rippled outward. Germany's surface fleet in the Atlantic was effectively ended. The Kriegsmarine would never again attempt a major operation in British waters. The Channel, which Hitler had dreamed of crossing with an invasion fleet, had instead become a graveyard for his navy's pride. The balance of naval power shifted decisively, not through a dramatic fleet engagement, but through minds waiting in the darkness. For the survivors, the psychological impact was perhaps deeper than the physical casualties. German naval officers had trained for battle against enemy ships, had prepared for the violence of combat. But there was something uniquely terrible about the mines, the invisible enemy that struck without warning, against which courage was meaningless and skill irrelevant. One survivor wrote, "We fought the British and survived. Then we fought the sea, and the sea destroyed us with weapons we never saw."
The families in German ports who had waved goodbye to the fleet in Brest received telegrams instead of returning sailors. In Wilhelmshaven, women gathered at the docks as rescue ships arrived, carrying wounded and traumatized men who spoke in whispers about the night the Channel consumed their comrades. The promised glory of Operation Cerberus had become a lesson in the limits of boldness. British newspapers proclaimed it a great victory, though the truth was more nuanced. Britain had not stopped the German fleet through superior tactics in open combat. Their aircraft had been shot down, their surface ships had been evaded, their guns had missed. But their mines, planted with mathematical precision months before, had achieved what firepower could not. It was victory through preparation, triumph through patience. In the years that followed, naval strategists would study the Channel Dash as a case study in asymmetric warfare. The Germans had possessed superior ships, better tactical position, and the initiative. The British had possessed time, resources, and the ability to prepare the battlefield. When these forces collided, the prepared position proved decisive. It was a lesson that would shape naval thinking for generations. The Channel itself returned to its ancient rhythms. Tides rose and fell over the wrecks of German ships. Currents scattered debris across miles of seabed. Fishermen learned to avoid certain areas where nets tangled on submerged metal. The war continued, but this particular battle was over, settled not with glory, but with the cold mathematics of mines and the patient calculation of men who understood that some victories are won not in the moment of battle, but in the months of preparation before. Admiral Ciliac survived to command again, though he never forgot the night the Channel claimed his fleet. In his private papers, discovered after the war, he wrote, "We came expecting a battle. We found an execution. The British didn't defeat us. They simply waited for us to defeat ourselves against weapons we couldn't see or fight." It was perhaps the most honest assessment of an engagement that looked like audacity, but ended as inevitability. The mines remained in the Channel for years after the war, a hidden legacy of the trap that had worked so perfectly. Clearance operations continued into the 1950s, each detonated mine a reminder of the night when Germany's surface fleet sailed into waters that had been transformed into a weapon. Some mines were never found, resting still on the Channel floor, their mechanisms corroded, but their lesson preserved. In Dover, a small memorial was erected to the British sailors and airmen who died in the surface engagements. The swordfish crews who flew to their deaths, the MTB sailors who charged against impossible odds. But there was no memorial to the mines, to the mathematicians who calculated their placement, to the planners who turned an entire body of water into a strategic weapon. Their victory was too quiet, too methodical, too unseen to capture public imagination. Yet it was decisive. The English Channel, for centuries a moat protecting Britain, had proven itself a weapon as well. Not through storms or dramatic battles, but through the patient application of science to warfare. Germany had entered seeking passage home and found instead that Britain's deadliest naval trap was not the guns that could be seen or the ships that could be fought, but the invisible barriers waiting beneath the waves, placed there by men who understood that the most effective weapons are often the ones the enemy never knows exist until it's too late. The water closed over the last piece of wreckage as dawn gave way to full morning. Survivors huddled in rescue boats, wrapped in blankets, staring at the sea that had swallowed their ships. The Channel looked peaceful now, its surface calm, reflecting clouds in gray mirrors. Nothing visible suggested the violence beneath. The broken hulls and drowned men,
the machinery of war resting in darkness. One young German sailor, rescued from the water after 8 hours of clinging to debris, was asked by his rescuers what he would remember most. He was silent for a long moment, then spoke words that would be repeated in naval academies for decades after. "The silence," he said. When the mine hit, there was noise, but before that, just silence. The sea was silent, the night was silent, and then everything was fire and breaking metal. We never saw what killed us. We never heard it coming. That's what I'll remember, the silence before the sea opened and swallowed us whole. The Channel kept its secrets well.